The Drake was a small Imperial survey ship, tasked with a routine mission to explore the fringes of Empire space. The crew had no way of knowing that their journey would be anything but routine. Captain Luris Draven sat at the helm, scanning the dark void ahead. The signal they had detected earlier had been faint, but consistent. A single pulse emitted from the edge of the Zeta 9 asteroid belt, far from any known star system. A strange place for a signal, but the Empire's deep space sensors didn't question it. They simply followed the trail. Draven's fingers hovered over the console, his eyes scanning the display as they drew closer to the source of the signal. His first officer, Lieutenant Ishavarn, stood by his side, equally focused on the readouts. They were surrounded by nothing but the cold vacuum of space. The asteroid belt was silent, almost oppressive. "Can you trace the signal origin?" Draven asked, his voice steady despite the growing sense of unease that gnawed at him. Varn nodded, her brow furrowing as her hands danced over the control panel. "It's coming from a vessel, Captain. A large one. The readings are all over the place, though. Something's not right." Her voice betrayed a hint of concern. Draven frowned. A large ship so far from known Imperial routes. The Empire's reach was vast, but this was uncharted space, territory where only the most remote colonies lingered. But a ship this far out, it didn't make sense, and yet there it was, hanging like a shadow in the void. "We should be cautious," Varn said, her voice tense now. "We've got the Empire's best systems," Draven replied, trying to calm both her nerves and his own. "Send a recon drone first. We don't know what we're dealing with yet." The drone shot out from the Drake, its tiny form barely visible against the backdrop of space. For a moment, there was nothing but the soft hum of the engines and the faint crackle of static from the drone's transmissions. Then the signal cut out, abruptly. "What happened?" Draven demanded, his fingers pressing into the armrest as his heart rate quickened. Varn worked her controls, her eyes flicking over the sensor logs. It's gone. The drone's destroyed." Draven's blood ran cold. Destroyed. He leaned forward. "By what?" Varn's face turned pale as she adjusted the controls again, trying to regain the sensor feed. The display flickered once before a new image appeared. A massive ship, darker than the surrounding space, almost blending into the shadows of the asteroid field. It was like nothing the Empire had ever seen. An imposing silhouette, sleek yet brutal in design, with sharp, angular edges, and it was alive with energy, pulsating in the dark. Before anyone could react, a flash of light erupted from the ship. A streak of energy shot across the distance between the two vessels. The Drake's shields barely had time to engage before the energy turned into something far more deadly. Kinetic rods, moving at near-light speed. The first hit shattered the Drake's forward shields. The second pierced the hull like a hot knife through butter, detonating the engine core. Alarms blared. The crew screamed as the ship tore apart. In the chaos, Draven's final thoughts were a simple, stunned realization. It wasn't a weapon of energy. It wasn't even a conventional projectile. It was something else. Something old. Something simple. And then, everything went dark. The last transmission from the Drake was a fractured distress signal, but its final words were unmistakable, crackling through the static. "That can't be a human warship, can it?" The Emperor's Grand Palace stood at the heart of the Imperial capital, a sprawling complex of polished obsidian spires and towering statues, designed to inspire fear and awe. But now, as the Imperial Fleet Command gathered in the shadow of the palace's monumental halls, fear had found its way into the Empire's highest echelons. Admiral Corrin's face was a mask of frustration as he stood before the Emperor's War Council. The footage from the Drake's last moments was playing in a loop on the massive holoscreen before them. A grainy recording of the ship's destruction, followed by the chilling image of the dark warship that had annihilated it. He had hoped the report was an exaggeration, an isolated incident, a freak accident, something explainable. But it was clear now. They were facing something far worse than they had anticipated. "I've reviewed the data, Your Imperial Majesty," Corrin said, his voice low and controlled despite the storm brewing inside him. The Drake was lost in an instant. The enemy's weaponry is unlike anything we've seen before. They're not using energy-based weapons. Those rods. Kinetic projectiles, Dr. Xavel Nern interjected, her voice sharper than usual. The xenologist had been assigned to the Empire's study of human cultures years ago, and while her theories were often dismissed as speculative, the recent events had forced everyone to reconsider her expertise. What we're seeing here is not advanced weaponry. It's basic, old, even primitive, by galactic standards. But what makes it so devastating is the application. They're using the laws of physics, basic matter and speed, as their weapons. The Emperor's brow furrowed, his piercing gaze locking onto Nern. "Are you saying humans are responsible for this?" Nern nodded, her expression darkening. "The trajectory of those projectiles indicates they were accelerated to near-light speeds. Humans have the potential to develop such technology, but their methods, well, they're not what we expect." The Emperor turned to Corrin. This can't be. We've encountered humanity before. Small, insignificant colonies at the edge of Empire space. They're primitive, fractured, backward. There's no way they could have mastered such a weapon." Corrin's jaw clenched. He knew the Emperor had a point. Humanity had always been seen as an afterthought, relegated to the most remote systems. It had taken centuries for them to even establish a semblance of interstellar contact, and the Empire had long believed that humanity's tech was stuck in the past. They were never supposed to be a threat. But the events at Zeta-9 shattered that illusion. "If this is true," Corrin continued, his voice rising with urgency, "then we're not dealing with a fringe species. They'd found a way to bypass our most advanced defenses, and the Drake wasn't the only ship to disappear." Nern stepped forward, her eyes scanning the grim faces of the War Council. "We've intercepted several human transmissions over the last few months. Static, seemingly random bursts of data. If you look at the patterns, they align with movements through Imperial space. They've been observing us, learning." The room fell silent as the implications of that statement settled over them. Humanity wasn't just advancing on its own. They had been studying the Empire, quietly gathering intelligence. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a calculated move. "Their tactics are simple, yet terrifying," Nern continued. "They understand our weaknesses, our over-reliance on energy shields, our confidence in advanced weaponry. They've learned how to break us." The Emperor's eyes narrowed, his fingers twitching with an irritation that was quickly escalating into anger. "And what of the other fleets? What is their next move?" Corrin hesitated, then spoke grimly. "Our intelligence indicates that humanity is not acting alone. If the rumors are true, they may have already begun to organize a broader force, possibly even a fleet of warships." "Impossible," the Emperor growled. "They cannot have built that many ships so quickly. It's preposterous." Nern shook her head. "That's what they want you to think." The Emperor clenched his fists in rage, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had never imagined that humanity, once nothing more than a footnote in the Empire's vast catalog of conquered species, would become a genuine threat. But now, standing on the precipice of an unknown war, he realized how mistaken he had been. "We cannot afford to wait," Corrin said, his voice stern and filled with determination. "We need to act. Immediately. If we don't, humanity will become a shadow in every corner of the galaxy." The Emperor's eyes flicked back to the holoscreen, where the image of the dark human warship lingered. His voice, now cold and resolute, echoed through the council room. "Prepare the fleet. We will crush this threat before it grows any stronger. We will not be undone by a species that still crawls on the edge of the galaxy." The War Council dissolved into hurried discussions and frantic plans, but the Emperor's thoughts were already elsewhere. For the first time in his reign, doubt began to gnaw at him. Could they truly defeat a species that had mastered the art of simplicity? Or had humanity, against all odds, become the Empire's greatest enemy? Admiral Corrin stood on the bridge of the Nemesis, the flagship of the Imperial fleet, as it surged forward into the void of space. The fleet had been mobilized in record time, a powerful, coordinated assault on the mysterious human warship that had decimated the Drake. It was a show of force, a statement to the galaxy that the Empire would not tolerate threats to its dominance. But as the stars streaked past the fleet's forward shields, Corrin's gut twisted with unease. The Emperor had ordered a full offensive, and the Nemesis led the charge, flanked by an array of destroyers and cruisers. Imperial tactics had always relied on overwhelming firepower, the kind that crushed anything in its path. They had fought against countless species and emerged victorious, and there was no reason to think this time would be different. Yet, as Corrin surveyed the starscape through the bridge's viewports, he couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would be unlike any other. There was something unnerving about the silence. The human ship, so far, had not responded to their signals, but that didn't matter. They were about to show them the might of the Empire. "Prepare the energy weapons," Corrin ordered. "We engage as soon as we reach optimal range." The fleet was closing in, and the tension was palpable. The human vessel, dark and ominous, loomed ahead, an enigma shrouded in shadow. Its design was stark, angular, and entirely unfamiliar, with no visible markings or signs of recognition. It didn't look like anything Corrin had ever seen in the galaxy. Still, the Empire's weapons would tear it apart. He was certain of that. "Admiral, we're within range," Lieutenant Varn reported, her voice tight with focus. "Shields are at full strength, and all weapons systems are online." Corrin nodded grimly. "Fire at will. Show them why the Empire is supreme." The order was given, and within moments, a volley of plasma blasts erupted from the Imperial fleet, cutting through space like bright, deadly streaks of light. The Nemesis unleashed a barrage of concentrated firepower, its weapons charging with blistering intensity. For a brief, hopeful moment, Corrin thought they had won. The projectiles sailed toward the human warship, the streaks of light growing larger as they closed the distance. And then, nothing. A shimmer of light appeared around the human ship, and the first volley of plasma splashed against it. But instead of tearing through its hull, the plasma blasts flickered and dissipated as if they had struck nothing at all. The human ship's shields, impossibly strong, absorbed the energy with ease. Corrin's eyes widened in disbelief. "Shields are holding," he muttered to himself. Before he could process the situation, the human ship reacted. With terrifying precision, it launched a single projectile, one that glinted ominously as it sped toward the fleet. It wasn't plasma. It wasn't energy. It was something else entirely. Something raw, elemental. The kinetic projectile collided with the first of the Imperial destroyers before anyone could react. The ship was torn apart, as if it were paper, the force of the impact so immense that its hull was crushed under the pressure. There was no explosion, no burst of flame, just utter devastation. The destroyers remained scattered into space, reduced to scrap in an instant. "Impossible," Corrin whispered under his breath. The next moment, another streak of light shot from the human warship. It collided with the Nemesis's port side, and the impact was deafening. The entire ship trembled violently, as if it had been struck by a hammer from the depths of space itself. Internal alarms blared, and lights flickered across the bridge. "Shields down to 30%, Varn shouted, her face pale. "The hull is..." Before she could finish, the second kinetic projectile slammed into the ship's engines, rupturing the reactor core. The Nemesis rocked as though it were a toy tossed in a storm, its vast, imposing structure groaning under the sudden, catastrophic pressure. Systems began failing one by one. The great ship's engines flared in a final, desperate attempt to escape the oncoming doom, but it was already too late. With a deafening metallic screech, the Nemesis core exploded, sending debris flying in all directions. "Admiral," Varn cried, her voice breaking. Corin stood frozen, his eyes wide with horror as the flagship disintegrated into the vastness of space. What remained of the fleet, scattered and disoriented, began retreating as if they were prey being hunted. The human ship moved slowly, methodically, as though savoring the chaos it had wrought. It was like a predator toying with its prey, ensuring it could destroy the enemy at its leisure, with brutal, surgical precision. Corin's hands gripped the console as he fought to maintain control of his own breath. "Pull back," he barked, but it was already too late. The fleet, decimated in mere minutes, began to flee, not in retreat, but in a panicked scramble for survival. As the human warship vanished into the black void, Corin knew one thing for certain. The Empire's power was nothing compared to what humanity had become, and their tactics, simple, brutal, effective, had just delivered a lesson the Empire would never forget. Dr. Xavier Nern's heart pounded in her chest as she stood in the hollow silence of the Imperial Archive's deepest chamber. The walls around her hummed with the cold, mechanical efficiency of the Empire's data storage systems. For years, she had pored over the fractured remnants of human transmissions, dismissing them as the ramblings of a species far behind in technological progress. But now, in the aftermath of the Nemesis' destruction, she could no longer ignore the obvious conclusion. The humans were far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. She paced in front of the holographic display, her mind racing. The data from the recent battle was now available for analysis, and as she sifted through the countless layers of intercepted human transmissions, something stood out, a pattern buried beneath layers of static and misdirection. It was hidden in plain sight. The human messages weren't just random bursts or transmissions for assistance. They were encoded with something else, something deliberate. The transmission, she found, was chilling. It wasn't military chatter, nor was it a call for help. It was a message, one that had been sent across multiple systems, bouncing from planet to planet, unnoticed by most. A message not just to the Empire, but to the galaxy as a whole. We've been watching. We've learned. And now we fight on our terms. Nern's stomach dropped as the full weight of the message hit her. Watching. Learning. The humans had not simply stumbled upon the Empire. They had studied them, examined their every move, and refined their strategies. Their entire approach to warfare was based on one simple, brutal concept: adaptation. Humans had no need for advanced shields or energy weapons. They had learned to exploit the natural laws of physics, turning seemingly primitive technology into the deadliest weapon the Empire had ever faced. In the years they had spent observing the Empire's movements, they had dissected the Empire's weaknesses with surgical precision. Nern's fingers hovered over the control panel as she pulled up older human transmissions, ones that predated the battle at Zeta 9. She found more evidence, files detailing their history, their philosophy. In one particularly striking document, she found something that made her blood run cold. A tactical manual written by humans that outlined their philosophy of war. We fight not by building better weapons, but by exploiting the failings of those who build them. It was brutal, efficient, and completely unlike the Imperial approach to conflict. The Empire had relied on superior technology to outgun and outblast its enemies, believing that strength and overwhelming firepower would always prevail. But humanity, with its boundless ingenuity, had discovered something else. They had mastered the art of simplicity. Suddenly, the door behind her slid open with a soft hiss, and Nern snapped out of her thoughts. She spun, instinctively reaching for the concealed weapon at her side, but it was only a young Imperial officer, pale-faced and nervous. "Dr. Nern," the officer said, voice trembling. I've just received a transmission from the front lines. There's been another attack. A fleet was ambushed near Alpha 12. Nern's eyes narrowed. What happened? The officer handed her a datapad, its screen displaying a report of the ambush. The fleet, a massive war group sent to retaliate against the human threat, had been utterly decimated. Once again, Kinetic projectiles had ripped through their ships with pinpoint accuracy, and the fleet had never stood a chance. The survivors had fled, their morale shattered. As Nern read the report, her mind raced. The Empire was falling apart, and no one knew how to stop it. Not even the Emperor. She quickly scrolled through the remaining files, searching for something, anything, that might give her an edge in understanding humanity's next move. But there was only one conclusion left. Humanity was not simply defending itself. They were preparing for something much greater. And the Empire had been blind to it for far too long. She needed to act. Without wasting another second, Nern transmitted a secure message to the highest-ranking human commanders she had tracked. She was defecting, sending them all the information she had uncovered. Everything about the Empire's weaknesses, its vulnerabilities, its strategic blunders. In return, she would ask for their protection. She had no illusions about her safety, but it was clear that the Empire was spiraling toward disaster. The only way to survive was to make an alliance with humanity. As she hit send on the transmission, she knew there was no going back. Let the truth reach them, she whispered to herself, staring at the screen. And then, without a moment's hesitation, she stepped away from the Imperial Archive and disappeared into the shadows. The war had begun, and humanity had already won the first battle. The Imperial Palace was eerily silent. For the first time in years, the Emperor's once grand halls seemed cold, empty, and devoid of the lavish grandeur that had once defined his reign. Even the distant hum of the palace's energy cores had a hollow mechanical sound to it, as though the entire empire itself was holding its breath. Emperor Varanath IV stood alone on the balcony overlooking the sprawling capital. His mind raced as the reports from the front lines flooded in, each more catastrophic than the last. Every fleet dispatched to deal with the human threat had been wiped out. The Nemesis had fallen, and the Empire's once dominant military was in tatters. He clenched his fists, staring at the distant sky, as though the stars themselves might offer him an answer. The invincible force he had built, the power that had crushed thousands of species across the galaxy, had been reduced to dust by a species he once thought insignificant. "Your Majesty," a voice interrupted his thoughts, breaking through the silence. Varanath turned sharply. Standing before him was General Karos, his most trusted military leader. The man's face was drawn, his uniform a testament to a once proud force, now crumbling under the strain of endless defeats. "What is it, Karos?" Varanath's voice was laced with frustration, his eyes narrowed as he regarded his general. "Another fleet destroyed. Another humiliating defeat. Not yet, Your Majesty. But we've received troubling news." Karos hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. "Dr. Nern has defected." Varanath's gaze hardened. Nern. That fool had no tactical insight. She was always full of theories. "Not this time," Karos replied, his voice grave. "She has sent information to the humans. Everything. Our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities. She has aligned herself with them, Your Majesty." The Emperor's pulse quickened. "No, this cannot be. She was one of our most trusted xenologists. She knew the consequences." "I fear the damage is already done," Karos said softly, the weight of the news pressing down on him. "The human commanders now know everything. They've already begun organizing. And they're not just defending themselves. They're advancing. They're preparing for a new phase in their war." Varanath's eyes glinted with anger. "They think they can defeat me. Defeat the Empire." His voice echoed in the room, filled with contempt and disbelief. "The humans are nothing but ants beneath my boot. Their weapons are far more advanced than we first thought, Your Majesty. They've adapted. They're using our own strategies against us." Karos stepped forward, his face grim. "I've seen the intelligence reports. Their tactics. They're simple, but they're terrifyingly effective. They're not trying to conquer. They're trying to eradicate us." Varanath's rage boiled over. "I will not let them destroy the Empire." His fists clenched tighter, and for a moment, it seemed as though the entire room trembled in response to his fury. "I've crushed galaxies before. These humans will bend to my will. I will not be undone by their tricks." But even as he spoke, doubt began to creep in. The reports from the front were undeniable. The humans had won every engagement, and the Empire's once unbreakable military had become a series of shattered, retreating remnants. "Your Majesty," Karos said softly, "there is something else. We intercepted a transmission from the human warship, a message sent to our fleets after the last battle. They are forming alliances. Others are joining them." "Others?" Varanath's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "Other species, Your Majesty. Some have already defected, while others are beginning to see that the Empire is on the verge of collapse. The humans, they've unified the galaxy against us." The Emperor's face twisted with rage and disbelief. "This is preposterous. How could they?" "They've mastered the art of unification," Karos explained, his voice tinged with something that bordered on respect. "While we tore worlds apart and built empires on fear, they built a coalition, a federation. We are the ones isolated now." Varanath staggered back as the truth hit him like a blow. The Emperor's reign, once so absolute, was slipping through his fingers. The Empire had spent centuries conquering the galaxy, but in a matter of months, a human-led coalition had begun to tear it apart. In that moment, something inside Varanath cracked. He could see the collapse, the inevitable fall. He knew what had to come next. "We will not go quietly into the night," he hissed, his voice low but filled with venom. "We will burn everything to the ground before we surrender. Everything." But deep down, even the Emperor knew the inevitable truth. The Empire's reign was coming to an end. The stars themselves no longer held the promise of power and domination. In the shadows of the galaxy, the human revolution was already underway, and nothing could stop it. The human warship Pride of Earth sailed through the void of space, its silhouette a dark, imposing figure against the backdrop of distant stars. On board, in the command room, the atmosphere was one of focused determination, a sharp contrast to the Empire's fear and chaos. Captain Alina Kessler stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the holographic map before her, tracking the movements of the Allied fleet. The alliance had grown stronger by the day. What had started as a desperate defense against the Empire's onslaught had evolved into a united front. Humanity, once fractured and divided, was now the spearhead of a galaxy-wide resistance, and with every passing battle, more species joined the cause, bringing with them fleets, resources, and invaluable knowledge. "Captain," Lieutenant Darren's voice broke through the quiet hum of the command center. "The Elseri have reported that their ships are ready for the assault on the Imperial stronghold. We can move forward with the plan." Kessler's lips curled into a tight smile. The Elseri, once a peaceful species relegated to the remote fringes of the galaxy, had proven themselves invaluable allies. Their advanced stealth technology had allowed the Alliance to infiltrate Imperial-controlled systems undetected, sabotaging supply lines and gathering vital intelligence. They were now poised to strike at the heart of the Empire. "Good," Kessler said, her voice firm. "Let's make sure they know we're coming. Prepare the fleet for the first phase of the operation. We'll need all ships in position before the Empire can mount any kind of resistance." As her crew went to work, Kessler turned her attention to the War Council briefing room, where representatives from the Alliance's various factions were gathered. The war was no longer just a battle of firepower, it was a battle of ideologies. The Empire had long relied on brute force, fear, and subjugation to maintain control, but humanity's vision of a united galaxy had resonated deeply with many species who had suffered under Imperial rule. As Kessler entered the briefing room, she was met by several of the Alliance's key leaders. Captain Rishar, a massive reptilian species from the planet Shore, and Governor Thala, a sharp-minded strategist from the Martian colonies. The air was thick with the gravity of their mission, but there was a sense of cautious optimism as well. "Captain Kessler," Governor Thala greeted her, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "The Elseri have pledged their ships, but we must strike now before the Empire can react. If we delay, they will regroup, and the window of opportunity will close." "I agree," Kessler replied. "But we also have to consider the consequences. The Empire has suffered significant losses, but Varanath will not go down without a fight. If we attack now, we risk turning this war into something even darker, something we may not be able to control." Captain Rashar let out a low growl. "The Empire is a beast, Kessler. It will not just roll over. If we hesitate, it will find a way to retaliate. We must destroy the heart of their power now. Otherwise, we're playing into their hands." Kessler paced slowly around the room, her eyes scanning the faces of the Alliance leaders. She knew the stakes were high. Every species represented in this room had suffered under the Empire's cruelty, and now they were united by one common goal: to end the reign of the Empire and create a new order. But the question was, what kind of order? The Empire had ruled by force, but the Alliance had made a different promise: freedom, self-determination, and a future without oppression. This was not just a war for survival. It was a war for the future of the galaxy, for a new way of life. "Then it's settled," Kessler said, her voice cutting through the room with finality. "We hit them with everything we've got. We take their stronghold, we tear down their walls, and we make sure they know that the galaxy is no longer theirs to command." As she spoke, she saw the resolve in the eyes of her fellow leaders. The Alliance was not just a military force. It was a movement, a revolution against everything the Empire stood for. But even as Kessler prepared for the battle ahead, a lingering doubt gnawed at the back of her mind. The Empire was cornered now, desperate and unpredictable. And when an empire fought for its survival, it was capable of anything, no matter the cost. Across the galaxy, on a darkened, isolated world, Emperor Varanath was gathering the remnants of his once proud fleet. His advisors had counseled him to surrender, but he would never give in. Not to humans, not to anyone. He had one final card to play. The vast expanse of space stretched infinitely before them, cold and indifferent, as the Alliance fleet gathered at the edge of the Imperial stronghold. Captain Elena Kessler stood on the command bridge of the Pride of Earth, her eyes locked on the massive holographic display showing the Imperial capital's orbit. This was it, the final push. "All systems are green, Captain," Lieutenant Darren reported, his voice tight with anticipation. "Our ships are in position, and we've detected no signs of immediate resistance." Kessler nodded, but the weight of the moment hung heavily on her shoulders. The Imperial Empire was in its death throes, its leadership fractured and desperate. The recent successes of the Alliance had forced the Empire into a corner, and now the final confrontation would unfold in the heart of their domain. The Empire would either fall here, or it would make a last, violent attempt to reclaim its lost power. "Status on Varanath's fleet?" Kessler asked, eyes scanning the intel reports. "Unclear," Darren replied, his face tense. "We've been tracking them, but they've remained cloaked in deep space. We can't pinpoint their exact location, but our sources suggest they're massing near the capital, preparing something big." Kessler's brow furrowed. They wouldn't have the resources for a large-scale retaliation, would they? "It's possible, Captain," Darren said, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "There's no telling what they might attempt in their desperation." Kessler stared at the star system before them. The Empire's capital, a sprawling, monumental city planet, loomed in orbit, surrounded by an impenetrable defense network and fleets of warships. It had been the jewel of the Empire, the center of their power, but now it was the last bastion of a dying regime. "Keep all ships in formation," she ordered. "This is the end. We hit them hard, fast, and without mercy. Let's finish this." Meanwhile, aboard the Imperial flagship Destiny's Edge, Emperor Varanath paced furiously before his war council. His once imposing presence had faltered, the constant failures and retreat wearing on him. The Emperor had refused to believe that the Empire could fall, but now, faced with an unstoppable human-led coalition, he knew there was no turning back. "We're out of time," Varanath growled, his eyes burning with a mixture of fury and resolve. "The Alliance will come for us, and they will expect us to cower. But they have underestimated the final weapon at our disposal." One of his senior officers, Commander Sarek, stepped forward. "My Emperor, you cannot mean—" "I do," Varanath interrupted, his voice a cold whisper of finality. "We have one last card. It's a weapon of unimaginable power, one that will make the Alliance pay for every inch of ground they've taken. It's our last hope." Sarek hesitated but nodded. "Very well, my Emperor. Prepare the weapon." Kessler felt it first. The eerie, unnatural stillness in space. The Alliance fleet was closing in, its ships arranged for maximum firepower. The final battle had begun, but something felt off. The calm before the storm, and then, without warning, it happened. From the depths of the Imperial stronghold, a massive shockwave rippled through space, its intensity disrupting the surrounding ship's systems. The Alliance fleet shuddered as if something heavy had just been unleashed. Kessler's heart skipped a beat as the holographic display flickered, showing a massive, shifting distortion in the fabric of space itself. "What is that?" Darren asked, his voice filled with awe and terror. "A weapon. We've never seen anything like it," Kessler murmured, eyes wide in disbelief. "Is that—" Before she could finish the thought, the weapon activated. A blinding beam of energy shot forth from the heart of the Imperial capital, a jagged line of pure destructive force that cleaved through space like a sword cutting through cloth. It was unlike anything the Alliance had encountered, its intensity overwhelming even the advanced shields of their ships. The Pride of Earth rocked violently as the beam came into range, its energy wave crashing against the ship's hull. The shields flared brightly before dimming, a warning signal flashing on Kessler's console. The beam continued, sweeping toward the heart of the fleet with terrifying precision. "Shields are failing," Darren shouted over the din of alarms. "We won't last long at this rate." Kessler gritted her teeth. They had been caught off guard, and now the Alliance was facing a weapon unlike any other. The Empire's last gambit had caught them in a trap, one they weren't prepared for. And in that moment, Kessler realized something. The Empire was willing to sacrifice everything, including its own capital, to destroy them. "Return fire," Kessler ordered, her voice unwavering despite the chaos. "We can't let them win. All ships, engage." The Alliance's fleets opened fire, unleashing everything they had in retaliation. The battle had escalated into a full-scale war for survival, and the Empire had just shown how far it was willing to go. But as Kessler watched the weapon's deadly beam tear through the Alliance ranks, a dark thought gnawed at her. Would humanity be enough to stand against the unimaginable power of the Empire's final weapon? The blinding beam of energy continued to streak through the void, carving through the heart of the Alliance fleet. Ships shattered into fragments, their hulls splintering under the force of the Empire's final weapon. The Pride of Earth was no exception, its shields buckling under the relentless assault. On the command bridge, Captain Kessler gripped the railing, eyes locked on the chaos unfolding across the holographic display. "Braced for impact," Kessler barked, her voice cutting through the rising panic in the command room. The ship groaned as another shockwave rattled its framework, and sparks flew from consoles. "Damn it! We need to counter this weapon, or we'll be wiped out." The weapon's beam continued to sweep across the battlefield, devastating ship after ship. The Alliance had underestimated the sheer scale of the Empire's desperation, and the Empire had underestimated the resolve of humanity. The question now was simple: could they survive long enough to turn the tide? Kessler's mind raced. They had come so far, but one devastating weapon could undo everything. The Empire had played their last card. And yet, humanity had one final untested advantage: their ability to adapt. It wasn't just a military tactic, it was their core strength. The fleet could still turn this around if they used what made them unique. "Lieutenant Darren," Kessler shouted, "activate the adaptive countermeasures. Channel every last bit of our power into the weapon's energy signature. We need to turn its force against them." "Understood." Darren's hands flew over the controls, quickly implementing the countermeasure protocols. The pride of Earth's engines roared to life as the energy field around the ship began to shift, reconfiguring its output to focus on nullifying the Empire's destructive beam. The blinding light of the weapon surged toward them once more, and Kessler felt the moment stretch into eternity. The ship rocked violently as the beam struck their defenses. For a heartbeat, it seemed the ship would be torn apart. But then something incredible happened. The energy from the Empire's weapon collided with the Alliance's countermeasures, diffusing the beam and redirecting its lethal force back toward its source. Across the battlefield, the Empire's weapon faltered. For the first time, it began to crack and destabilize. A massive, rippling shockwave tore through the Imperial capital as the weapon backfired on itself, sending out a wave of energy that swept across the surrounding Imperial fleet. "It's working," Darren yelled, his voice filled with disbelief and triumph. Kessler's eyes widened as she saw the shockwave tear through the Empire's remaining ships. The once proud fleet was now disintegrating, its flagship Destiny's Edge engulfed in the explosion of its own weapon. The capital itself trembled, as if the very foundation of the Empire was crumbling beneath the weight of its own final gambit. The tides had turned. "All ships, prepare to advance," Kessler ordered, her voice steely with determination. "This is our moment. Let's end this." The remaining Alliance ships, now emboldened by their success, rallied together and surged forward, engaging the now disorganized remnants of the Imperial fleet. The Empire's forces, thrown into disarray by their own desperation, were no match for the unified, relentless assault of the Alliance. One by one, Imperial ships fell, their defenses shattered, and their commanders powerless to stop the advancing human-led forces. As the battle raged, Kessler's thoughts turned to the Emperor. Varanath had gambled everything on his final weapon, and in the end, it had led to his own destruction. The last remnants of Imperial power were disintegrating before her eyes. The war was over. Hours later, as the battle finally came to a close, the silence of victory settled over the battlefield. The Alliance had achieved the impossible. The Empire, in all its grandiosity, had been toppled not by overwhelming force, but by a species that had refused to surrender, refused to be broken. Kessler stood on the command bridge, staring out at the smoldering wreckage of the Imperial stronghold. The galaxy's fate irrevocably changed. The stars seemed brighter now, as if a new dawn was breaking across the cosmos. "Captain," Darren said, his voice filled with awe. "It's over. We did it." Kessler nodded, her expression resolute. "We did. But this is just the beginning." Humanity had won, not just a war, but a galaxy. The remnants of the Empire would no longer rule. The Alliance would rebuild a galaxy united in freedom, one where no species would ever again live under the thumb of tyranny. The future was unwritten, but one thing was certain. Humanity, the species once underestimated and overlooked, had proven its place in the stars. The galaxy was theirs to shape.